You need a family by Friday, the lawyer said. Then he looked at the woman who hated him. There are moments in life that catch you completely off guard. Not the big ones you see coming from a mile away. The graduations, the retirements, the funerals you've had time to prepare for. No, the ones that truly change everything are the quiet ones. The ones that arrive on an ordinary Tuesday morning, in a fluorescent-lit office that smells like old coffee and printer paper, when a man in a gray suit looks up from a manila folder and says words you never expected to hear. Mr. Calloway, the lawyer said, folding his hands carefully on the desk, you need a family by Friday. Daniel Calloway, 47 years old, dark-haired, sharp-jawed, the kind of man who filled a room without trying, sat very still. He had walked into that office expecting to sign some papers. His late uncle's estate, a formality. He had not expected this. I'm sorry, Daniel said slowly. Say that again. His name was Daniel Calloway, and he had spent the better part of 20 years building a life that looked, from the outside, like everything a man could want. A corner office in a high-rise overlooking the Manhattan skyline. A kitchen with a marble countertop and pendant lights and a gas stove he actually knew how to use. He cooked on Sunday evenings. Pasta, usually, stirring quietly while the city hummed 40 floors below him. It was the 1 hour of the week he allowed himself to simply be still. He was not a cold man. People sometimes mistook his seriousness for coldness, his focus for arrogance. He moved through the world with a kind of contained intensity, like a man who had learned, somewhere along the way, that feelings left out in the open tended to get you into trouble. So he kept them close. Kept everything close. What Daniel did not have, had not had for a very long time, was a family. The lawyer, a round-faced man named Gerald Fitch, explained the situation with the careful patience of someone who had delivered complicated news before. Daniel's uncle, a man he had barely known, had left behind a small trust fund. Not enormous, but meaningful. Enough to matter. The catch, and there was always a catch, was a clause written into the will some 30 years ago, back when the uncle was apparently feeling philosophical about legacy and belonging. The inheritance could only be released to a recipient who could demonstrate, to the satisfaction of a court-appointed evaluator, that they were part of an active, functioning family unit. A family unit, Daniel repeated. A household, Gerald clarified. Children present. A sense of domestic life. The evaluator visits Friday afternoon. Daniel stared at the man. That's 4 days from now. Gerald nodded with the expression of someone who was very sorry but also very done with the conversation. He called Margaret on the drive home. Margaret Hale, 45, blonde, composed in the way that people who have survived a great deal tend to be composed, was the last person Daniel expected to call. She was also, if he was being honest with himself, the first person who came to mind. They had history, not the romantic kind, though there had been a moment, years ago, that neither of them talked about. Mostly they had the complicated kind of history, the kind built from shared professional battles, from disagreements that had gotten loud, from a mutual respect that had somehow survived 2 years of being on opposite sides of a custody case that had torn a family apart. She had never quite forgiven him for that case. He understood why. Margaret had a daughter, Lily, 6 years old, blonde braids, blue bows in her hair, the kind of child who looked at you with clear, curious eyes and made you feel, somehow, that she could see straight through to whatever you were actually made of. Lily had a way of climbing into the center of a room and making it hers, not by demanding attention, but simply by being so thoroughly, joyfully present that the room reorganized itself around her. Daniel had met Lily exactly twice. Both times, she had decided he was her friend before he'd had a chance to have an opinion about it. "I need a favor," he said when Margaret answered. "A big one." There was a long pause. Long enough that he could hear the sound of her apartment, the soft noise of children's voices in the background, a television somewhere, the particular quiet of a home that was lived in. "Daniel," she said finally. The last time you asked me for a favor, it involved a deposition that kept me in a conference room until 2 in the morning. This is different. Another pause. How different? He told her. All of it. The will, the clause, the Friday deadline. He told her plainly, the way he told her everything, without softening the edges, because she had never needed him to. When he finished, the line was quiet for so long that he thought she might have hung up. You're serious, she said at last. I am. He heard her exhale. That slow, considering breath she made when she was working something out. Daniel, I have a daughter. I can't just. I know. And you and I are not exactly. I know that too. I still think you handled the Mercer case wrong. Margaret. He stopped at a red light. The city moved around him, unhurried, indifferent. I know. I've thought about it too. More than you probably think. She said yes. Not enthusiastically. Not without conditions. She said yes the way a woman who has learned to trust her instincts says yes. Carefully, with her eyes open, because something in her recognized that this moment mattered, even if she couldn't yet say exactly why. They agreed to keep it simple. She and Lily would come to his apartment Thursday evening. They would have dinner. He would cook. It seemed only fair, and they would be present for the Friday afternoon evaluation as a household. 2 adults, 1 child, a shared meal, a credible life. Nothing more complicated than that. Thursday evening arrived soft and cool, the way early autumn evenings do in New York, when the light goes golden and the city seems, briefly, to exhale. Margaret arrived at his door with Lily on her hip and a bottle of white wine in her hand and an expression that said very clearly, I reserve the right to change my mind about all of this. Lily, for her part, walked straight into his apartment, looked around with those wide, unguarded eyes, and said, You have a lot of books. I do, Daniel said. Do you read them all? Most of them. She considered this. My mom reads to me every night. Even when she's tired. Margaret, behind her, said quietly, Lily. It's true, Lily said simply, and went to investigate the bookshelf. Dinner was pasta. Of course it was. He stood at the stove in the evening light, the city spread out behind the windows like something from a painting, and he stirred the sauce while Margaret sat at the counter helping Lily with a drawing she'd brought along in her backpack. The scene was domestic in a way that surprised him, not uncomfortable, not performed. Just quiet, just real. At some point, without quite meaning to, he started talking. About his uncle, the man he'd barely known. About the summers he'd spent as a boy at a house upstate, and how his uncle had seemed, in memory, like a man who had understood something about belonging that Daniel had never quite figured out for himself. Margaret listened. She didn't offer solutions or quick reassurances. She just listened, the way she always had, with the full, steady attention of a person who took other people seriously. He probably didn't mean for the clause to be cruel, she said finally. No, Daniel agreed. I think he meant for it to be hopeful. She looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, the way she rarely did. That's a generous reading. I'm trying something new. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Close enough. Friday afternoon, the court evaluator arrived, a pleasant woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a clipboard, the kind of person who had seen enough of life to know the difference between what was performed and what was real. She stayed for an hour. She drank the coffee Daniel made. She watched Lily show her a drawing. The apartment, the 3 of them, rendered in crayon with the confident inaccuracy of a 6-year-old's hand. She asked gentle questions and wrote quiet notes. When she left, she paused at the door. Mr. Calloway, she said, I've done a lot of these evaluations. She glanced back at the room, at Margaret clearing the coffee cups, at Lily singing softly to herself on the rug. This one felt real. She said it without ceremony. Then she left. The inheritance cleared the following week. Daniel donated half of it to a literacy program, Lily's influence, though he didn't say so out loud. He and Margaret had dinner again the following Thursday. And the one after that. Lily, who had decided all of this was perfectly natural, continued to point out how many books he had. He started reading to her sometimes, on the evenings when Margaret stayed late and the city went dark outside the windows. His voice, she told him gravely, was very good for reading aloud. He thought about his uncle. About clauses written in hope. About the strange, roundabout ways that life sometimes finds to bring you exactly where you needed to be. He thought about Margaret, the way she had said yes when she didn't have to. The way she was slowly, carefully, deciding to trust him again. And he thought that maybe belonging wasn't something you built all at once. Maybe it was something you arrived at gradually, one quiet evening at a time. If this story found its way to your heart today, we'd love it if you'd take a moment to like it and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave us a comment below. We read every single one, and hearing from you means more than you know. Thank you for being here.